Welcome to House Education on January 23rd. Have just a brief meeting this morning before we head to the floor for a bill introduction, and this would be Bill H 698, introduced by a group of representatives, and it's a 29-page bill, so we probably ought to just get started. Floor is yours, Legislative Counsel.
Thank you, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel.
John Gray, Legislative Counsel.
So in the interest of time, let me share my screen. I think what would be most helpful is to read the statement of purpose, and then we can dive in for a more thorough walkthrough at your direction, and then that should leave time for the sponsor to
Sounds great.
have enough time. So this bill, so this is H 698 as introduced. We're going to be on the first page, line 13, statement of purpose. We rarely do this, but I think this is effective for this bill.
Yep.
So this bill proposes to update various education policies in Act 73. The first thing it does is it removes the amendment to Section 823 of Title 16 that would allow a receiving school to charge a sending school an additional fee for high school students. So it keeps what Act 73 did for the calculation of tuition as the base plus weights. But if you'll remember from Act 73, there was the provision that a receiving high school could charge up to 5% of the base for high school students. This bill proposes to remove that option, but keep the base plus weights concept. This bill proposes to remove all references to class size minimums. So it takes it out of class size minimums, no longer repeals them out of Title 16, although we're not really repealing because it hasn't taken effect yet. And removes reference to them from Section 828, the schools that are approved to receive tuition section. So independent schools would need to follow everything else that that Act 73 required of them, except the concept of class size minimums is removed entirely by this bill. And then it reverts any unused portion of the appropriation made to the school district voting ward working group to the general fund upon passage. So there was a $200,000 appropriation to Ledge Council for the voting ward working group. Some backdoor negotiations going on there. There would need to be an MOU for the Secretary of State's office to use that, yada, yada, yada. To the extent that anything has not been touched in that appropriation, it would revert back to the general fund when this bill passes. And I'll turn it over to John.
Yep. So my sections in this, while large in impact, are quite easy to describe. So the bill also proposes to update the foundation formula in Act 73 to add a secondary student weight. You're going to see a bunch of text in the bill related to this. It's going to look like a bigger change than it is because we're repealing the Act 73 student weighting provisions and then recreating Section 4010 of Title 16 for that pupil weighting. But all that it's doing is adding in a secondary student weight of, I think it's 0.125 for those in grades 9 through 12. And then finally, the bill proposes to remove the amendments to Vermont's property tax classification system added by Act 73. So that creation of the new non-homestead, non-residential, and the move away from just homestead, non-homestead. We would have differentiated categories within non-homestead. This bill proposes to remove those updates to the property tax classification system. In other words, it leaves you with the existing property tax classifications that you have today. And you're going to see a bunch of text associated with this. Again, a lot of it's just little changes that we have to make to impose the state of education property tax rate. You'll recall the table with statutory factors. That has to be updated with the removal of the property tax classification updates from Act 73.
Are there any particular sections you want to look at the actual language of?
I think that you basically have covered what we need for the moment, and if you just wouldn't mind hanging out, and there may be questions that come up. And we'll welcome Representative Feltus to join us. Good morning.
Good morning.
Sorry we don't have a bigger crowd here for you, but
That's okay.
sure people are paying attention.
Got some important people here. Great. Some of the all important people. I'm Marty Feltus from Linden, Caledonia 3. and I was the sponsor of this bill. Basically, there are two items in here I wanted to accomplish. One of them was not mentioned, which is just the very end of my contention is that we need to go to the foundation formula. I like that. I think there need to be some amendments to the foundation formula, and one of those is adding in a secondary school weight and also eliminating the class size minimums, although that's not part of the formula. It is part of the discussion. But I think we need to do that irrespective of what happens to the districting discussion, the consolidation of districts. So at the end of the bill, there's a change in the effective dates of certain things. So my intent was that whether we change school districts or not, I think the foundation formula is a very good way to go forward with funding of our school systems. And because I believe that because it would provide a predictable amount of money from the state of what we need to come up with in order to fund education. It would provide a predictable amount for each district, whatever the size of the district is. They would have a predictable amount of money to work with. And there would therefore be a predictable tax amount available for all taxpayers. So that I think you would avoid a lot of the volatility. I think you would, if I understand that the foundation formula, the characteristics of the foundation formula may change between now and 2028 because JFO is hiring another consultant to take a look at all of that. And that's part of Act 73 to come back with another report of what those factors ought to be. And I understand that could happen, but and I don't object to that. But my point is that I believe we need to have a predictable way to calculate education expenses. And if we agree on what those factors are, whether they're the ones that we already have or whether new ones we come up with, you calculate the number of students and what those students' characteristics are, and you have a total amount that we know the state needs to raise. And likewise, each district knows I've got $50 million here to work with, or $100 million, or whatever it is based upon their student population, and they work to that budget. Therefore, they may figure class size minimums are important, or they're not, depending upon their characteristics. They may decide there are some of the supplemental programs that they want to continue to do, or they want to discontinue. They may decide there are some administrative functions that they don't need, that they can change those. They may decide, teacher numbers. They can decide any number of things within their $50 million pot or whatever it is, as long as they're meeting the education quality standards. They may decide, I want to cooperate with the district next door and do some cooperative purchasing or bus contracts or things like that. But they have a fixed amount of money to work with, and they figure out what they need to do to serve their particular students. So that's the reason I think that the foundation formula is very effective. And I think we need to do that no matter what we do with the consolidation of districts. As you know, right now it's tied to the fact that we need to have the districts consolidated before the foundation formula goes into effect. So I'm saying disconnect those 2 points. Just let whatever happens with consolidation, and I know that's a very big topic, let that play out however we decide to play it out. But let's institute the foundation formula anyway. And I know the foundation formula can change between now and then. I also, as part of that, I did add in the high school weight. As you know, in the discussions we had last year, the discussion was we don't need an extra weight for secondary. And I know in the bill, part of this new study is to determine whether we do need it or not. I just think it was helpful to actually put it in as one of the factors. Somebody later can change the number I put in. They can make it greater or less or put a 0 on it. But I think it needs to be one of those benchmarks that needs to be checked. And the reason I picked 12.5% is because that's the number that shows up on the allowable tuition report that the Agency of Education does every year when they look at the average tuition. When school districts need to send students to another district for either elementary or secondary students, there's an allowable rate that they can charge. And the average across the state in this last year for elementary students was 20,000 something or other. The average for our secondary students was 23,000. It's a 12% difference. I think that's a reasonable amount to use as a basis to put into this bill. The next study may come up with a different number, but I think that's a good foundation to start with. So that's where the 12.5% came from. The other half of my bill, or it's not probably page-wise, it's the other half of the bill, is the idea of repealing the new creation of a non-homestead residential tax class. And it's just very simple. I don't agree that that's fair. I don't understand how we can feel that a non-homestead residential property bears any greater responsibility for our education expenses than a commercial property or industrial property or open land or anything that's in the non-homestead category. Now, those properties, non-homestead residential, pay property tax. They pay it as a non-homestead. And yes, they're contributing to our education system, and they need to. Education is public good. But I don't see that there's any justification whatsoever for separating that group out so that you can put a higher tax on that group. I just don't think that group bears any greater responsibility for our education system than we, the residents, do, and everyone else. So I just don't think that's fair. And I opposed it when it was in Ways and Means last year. They did direct PBR to do a study of how they would implement that kind of a change. And there's a report that came out from PBR outlining 8 steps that they would have to go through in order to make that change. A lot of administrative things. A lot of that is burden back on the local listers because they're going to have to classify each piece of property and make sure how it fits. And then there's the question of how you verify that, how you do the compliance, how do you double check for make sure, and just a lot of work. They didn't give an estimate of how much money it would take to do that, but my guess is it would be $400,000, $1 million. I don't know. A lot of work within PBR to make that change. And it just didn't seem to me that, well, my basic contention is it's not fair to have that classification anyway, period. If you do it, it's still going to cost an awful lot of money to do that. So that's my concern. So those are really the only 2 items I was trying to accomplish with this bill. Is number 1, say, let's go to the foundation formula, whether we do consolidation of districts or not. And the purpose being that we would have a fixed amount that could be calculated what the state needs to spend in order for education so we can figure out where to come up with that money. And that each district would also have a fixed amount. But it would be based upon their number of students and their characteristics. And so then we are sure that we still are offering equal opportunity to all of the students because we have considered their characteristics and have decided, whatever the language in the bill says, the adequate amount for the amount for an adequate education, I believe, is what was studied in the bill. So that's just my concern. That we need to do that anyway, whether we do consolidation. And then I would prefer to have a marker in there for secondary education. And then I would prefer to just simply eliminate that other tax classification. It's a fair thing.
Thank you very much. Very, very well presented. There is one thing here. What about the defunding of the ward working group?
Oh, only because if we don't do the consolidations, they're not going to have the new voting boards, it would appear to me. And that if whatever we don't spend simply needs to get reverted back, which would probably happen anyway, frankly.
Yes, I guess I'm wondering, is this basically by defunding the ward working group, which I agree with you, I think if they didn't use their money, the money would revert back. But this is basically saying we're not going to do ward drawing.
Oh, I didn't think so. I thought it was reverting whatever was not used.
Yes, I guess my concern would be that should we come up with newer, larger districts, and don't have any money, how are we going to move to newer, larger districts?
Okay, well, maybe I misunderstood or maybe.
I really just wanted to make sure that I understood your motivation.
I'm not trying to defund that. I was just assuming that that may not happen. And if it does not happen, then obviously we don't need to spend the money and it should go back.
Thank you. I guess I sort of look at the other sponsors of the bill with you. Many of them had concerns that they live in areas where they're on the very much the low end of the per pupil spending, and that the foundation formula would actually fund their schools at a significantly higher level than they are today, which would also increase their property taxes.
I understand that.
And that the second home tax is really there to raise the funds to help those who are affected by that. And it's not like this district's going to get this amount of money. It's obviously on an individual Vermonter basis. But, as we put together Act 73, the idea with the second home tax was that the vast majority of Vermonters would come out at the end of this better off than they were going into it. And so I think of the people, this was definitely a concern of folks that way up in the Northeast Kingdom, that, well, if we're funding our schools at a higher rate, our taxes are going to go up. And the second home tax for me was about those Vermonters most affected by that being able to burn through the property tax rebate, the revamp rebate homestead exemption program.
I understand, yes, many of the small communities up in my part of the state were concerned about the fact that they currently spend less than other schools, and therefore the foundation formula would give them more money.
And just the end of the second home tax to me would be removing the sort of the tool to help those Vermonters most affected by increases in property taxes.
That's true. That's true. However, I think many of those folks also feel that it's not fair that the second homeowners don't bear any more responsibility for educating my children than the store down the street that will eventually benefit because, they're in the general community. It's just a fairness of I don't think it's fair to tax those people at a higher rate. And the persons I spoke with that I think you're referring to in the smaller towns would agree with that concept as well. I think what they are hoping, and I would be hoping, is that if indeed we go to the foundation formula and it turns out that there is a dramatic difference between what districts are currently spending and what the foundation formula would bring them and therefore cause them higher taxes, that perhaps the Ways and Means Committee could come up with some kind of a transition mechanism that would move that through, just as we have on I think the supplemental district spending. There's a transition mechanism on that as well.
And there is a transition mechanism on the foundation formula. It's a 5-year phase in.
Right.
Still, it would still increase taxes in those areas that currently don't spend at the foundation formula level.
That's true. I think some of those communities also recognize that maybe they should be spending more.
Property taxpayers may not agree with that.
Well, they're property taxpayers that are our representatives as well. Obviously,
Thank you.
but I understand your concern.
I represent law.
Thanks. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I first I wanted to say thank you. That was so clear, your perspective, and I love the way you walked through it. So I know exactly where you're coming from. But you said something that's makes me very curious because I'm hearing something different in my region, and I'm trying to clarify this in my head. The second homeowner, I hear, and this isn't my opinion, I'm sharing what I hear regularly from my constituents, that our enrollments are declining significantly in my area. I'm assuming in your area too. And part of the reason is folks can no longer find a home in their town to purchase and move there with their families because they're taken up by they're non-residential now. They're second homeowners, and I'm generalizing, but that's something I hear regularly when I have my constituency with my constituents, and I hear you on the taxation fairness thing, but I think there's a lot of people in my region who feel really burdened by the fact that their residential property tax rate is higher than the non-residential of the home, and though that's included in the homes that nobody is occupying and families can afford. So I just wondered about your thoughts on that, because I really appreciated your thoughts about fairness.
Well, it just goes back to the fairness issue to me. I understand that in some communities, the way that has shifted is that, yes, some second homeowners as non-homestead end up with a lower, they swap. They don't in my community, but I know they do in some communities. But isn't that a function of going back to the school spending? Because we take the tax rate and then it gets modified by the per pupil spending. And it appears to me that in most of those areas, the per pupil spending is high, and that is why it adjusts the tax rate up. I guess I do understand the issue in terms of the lack of housing availability from that perspective.
Yeah, just for clarity, it's not only housing availability, but it is what happens, which is a decline in enrollment, which is what creates a higher spending. You know, districts.
Okay, I can see that.
That's my connection there. Thank you, though. I really do appreciate you making me think about it.
Yes, yeah. I mean, frankly, our statewide property tax goes only to education.
Right.
If our statewide property tax went to help transportation, environment, correction, the public safety, those kinds of things that second homeowners would indeed benefit from, I think that would be a legitimate change. But our statewide property tax goes only to education. And I just simply don't believe that those property owners bear any greater responsibility for that than I do as a resident. I mean, we've already said homeowners don't pay as much as everybody else.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Can I ask you,
Yeah.
just for clarification, the removing the class size minimums would remove any path to not meeting them and then the corrective action and then all of that follows, right? Like that would be done, that'd be over if you remove that. And my other question is, can we, and I'm not saying we would do this, but can we choose parts of this and then amend other parts out and say, we do want to pass this part, but not this part?
We're the House Education Committee, we can do whatever we want.
It's supposed to help you do whatever you want to do.
Okay. I'm not saying that I'm like trying to vote part of it out, but just like.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what happens with any piece of legislation.
Yeah, okay.
You can like parts of it and not like other parts of it. Or modify.
Yeah.
You know, that's there.
I'm gonna repeat back to you what I think I've heard regarding the topic of class size minimums and tell me if I'm wrong. It seems that the philosophy behind this bill is just to say, rather than dictating how schools sort of manage to the money in terms of class size minimums, just let them manage to the money.
Right. That's my feeling. Right. Some districts.
And if they want to not have larger classes, they can, or if they can, if they want, if they don't, if they want to make the money.
There and they've not got enough rooms and enough bodies, teachers to do it, you do it. But if you don't, or if for your students, you think it would be better to have them in a larger grouping, you do that too. You just manage to the money, not require you to change class sizes.
So how would that affect though the district size minimums that are in there? Like there should be 4,000 to 8,000 in the district if we no longer have class size minimums. That would be gone too?
No, I mean, if we go to larger districts and, Representative Feltes said that this should all happen regardless of whether we go to redistricting
Right.
or not. But that doesn't change anything. All the districts is a different governance.
Yeah, okay. Right, I guess the reason I'm asking is because like, if it's so complicated, but if like you can have a class of just 3 students in a school, and then that just becomes the norm, that makes it like a lot harder to reach that 4,000 or 8,000 threshold for the district if we now are allowing all these tiny little schools, doesn't
Well,
it?
no, but the number of kids is the same.
Right, okay. Except that we would have consolidated them to have bigger classes.
Whether there's 4 kids per class or 40,
Yeah,
it's still the same
Okay.
number of kids.
all right. If you say so.
Well, too early.
It's just how they're distributed within
Right,
that
okay.
district. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. If anybody, are there any other questions? Then if not, we